Archangel Gabriel Orthodox Church at 1237 Eros Landry Road here in Lafayette, Louisiana. Today we're going to continue Orthodoxy 101 and the sacraments by talking about marriage. And it's kind of a dual one today because I'm also going to be talking about marriage and monasticism. Because these two sacraments, and monasticism is a sacrament of our church, they're very similar in many different ways. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the first thing that we need to discuss is, what is marriage? What is marriage in the concept of at least Orthodox thinking and framework? And we know of marriage as, at least from a secular point of view, as a contract between two consenting adults when people come to share their homes or to share their property, and that's sort of the secular aspect of marriage. But the spiritual aspect of marriage is something that's very different. And marriage, as defined by the church, would be, marriage is the unification of a man and a woman before God with the intention of following Christ and raising a faithful, holy family through that union. That is the definition of marriage in the Orthodox Church. Marriage, just like monasticism, is a vocation. People are called to being married. People are called to celibacy. People are called to monasticism. And so because of that, marriage really isn't for everybody. Just as monasticism isn't for everyone. And there's a great, great quote by, and I don't like to quote him very often, but it's a good quote nonetheless. And I don't know if it was from one of his movies, was it from Annie Hall or whatnot, but it's Woody Allen. And Woody Allen said, marriage is the death of freedom. And he's right about that. Marriage is the death of freedom because in marriage, you give your will to somebody. You give up your will. You no longer have your own will. So who do you give your will to?
Your spouse.
Your spouse. Okay. This is why marriage and monasticism are very, very similar to each other. They're not very different from each other. Because in marriage, you give your will to your spouse. In monasticism, who do you give your will to?
The abbot.
You give your will to your abbot. That's who you give your will to. So there really is not that much difference between marriage and monasticism.
Would you talk a little bit about the concept of a call? Back when I was a young Presbyterian, they talked a lot about a calling, and you had a calling to the ministry, that was the important one, or you had a calling to various professions, I haven't heard that discussed in much detail since then, so what would the Orthodox concept be?
Well, I mean, we still have sort of a very similar concept of that, in that there are people that are called to certain professions, just as I was called to the priesthood. And in a very same sense that I was called to be married. And these are things that they sort of don't come out in a burning bush. Something that we sort of discover and unwrap and determine as we go forward in our lives. And sometimes our vocations change. Not necessarily marriage, but some people with their jobs, they change and evolve. And
is this a call? Presbyterian concept was that this was a call from God. Would we think of it that way? I thought of being a teacher that way.
Very simple. We would say that yes, it is a calling from God, but ultimately it's a choice. It is a choice as well. When my wife's not in here to sort of smirk, but I'll say this. Sometimes when my wife, oh there she is. When my wife asks me, why do you love me? And it's not because she's tall and attractive and blonde necessarily. Those are good reasons. But I tell her that the reason why I love her is because I chose to love her. I chose her. Just as God chooses us. Chooses us to be Orthodox. We might have been inclined to Orthodoxy, but that doesn't come out of the blue. That comes from somewhere. And so yes, it is very much a calling for God, what we choose to do. But it's also our choice whether or not to follow that calling.
It's sort of an offer from God
Right.
that we take up or do not take up.
Right. So.
I guess in that you see sometimes that you see that somebody has a calling but they don't will to do it. Like you see somebody has a gifting in which they or maybe they have a calling or a vocation to do something and they don't want to do it, but maybe over time they develop into it, or I kind of begrudgingly accept that
You remind me of Jonah.
do have that calling. Yeah, kind of like Jonah.
And I think that's sort of a frustration that a lot of priests have, because ultimately, with Christians, I mean, we're all called, as Orthodox Christians, to come to church and to participate in the church and to support the church, and that doesn't always happen. So you have people who blatantly ignore their callings, as Orthodox Christians. I mean, it's going back to baptism. Whenever people come to me and they want to baptize their child, and I don't see them in church, and I just tell them, I said, "Are you sure you really want to do this?" And they're like, "Well, why not? It's perfectly natural that we should, baptize the child, and it's tradition." I said, "Yes, it is tradition, but when you baptize your child, it's no longer yours. You're giving it to God. I mean, when you put that chrism on that kid's forehead, it's branding them as a slave of Christ." That's one of the reasons why when we chrismate people, we say seal, because that goes back to Roman days, the Roman Empire, when slaves were branded and other slaves would mock. This was sort of like an initiation thing. That's what it goes back to. And so, when you baptize that child, you are putting that child into a situation where they're giving up a lot of things. You're giving up your control over that child, your will over that child. It's the same thing with marriage. A lot of people get into it without knowing what they're getting into. And I think that's why marriages fail in this country. It's because we have lost this idea that marriage is a vocation. That marriage is something that we're called to do, and it's about give and take. It's the death of freedom. As I was saying, is what Woody Allen said. Marriage is the death of freedom because you give up your will. When there's a reading from Ephesians, when the man is when the man and the woman are being married at the crowning service, and it's before the gospel, the epistle talks about, "Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands," and it goes through this laundry list of what women are supposed to do. And a lot of people, when I've done marital counseling, they said that's absolutely sexist. The woman's having to submit herself to her husband and do all this other stuff. And I said, yes, but read what the husband has to do. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ has loved the church and gave his life for it. It's essentially telling husbands, you need to be prepared to die for your wives. That if it comes down to you and your wife, you put yourself out there. So I think oftentimes, with that, the man has the short end of the stick, so to speak. There's also a Greek tradition, which is kind of funny, that during the crowning service, when it gets to that point where it says, "Wives, submit yourselves to your husband," the wife playfully steps on the foot just to remind him who's boss. So my wife did that to me at my wedding.
Have you ever counseled people, on the baptism especially, but marriage too, and said these things to them and had them say, "No, I don't think we'll go ahead with it"?
I've had people who've done that. And then they went around and got married by justice of the peace, which I didn't really understand.
Yeah,
But-
well, I understand it in the light of conversation I had with a teenage girl when I was first at the school here. And there were some questions that were being discussed. And one of the questions was, what are you looking for in your future mate? And she began by saying, well, for my first husband, I would like,
Oh.
and I didn't breathe for another whole minute at least. And I don't remember where that went, but she was, it was perfectly, and I did ask her, don't you think that or don't you want to have only one husband? And she said, well, that's the ideal, but I can't really expect that realistically.
I was reading Aldous Huxley's Brave New World last summer, rereading it, and he had it was a foreword, or just an introduction, on the latest edition that came out when he was still alive, and he wrote about how, he talked about the breakdown of marriage in Brave New World, and ultimately, if you read that book, marriage it's almost like a curse word. You're not supposed to say wife, not supposed to say husband. People aren't supposed to belong solely to another person. The state motto is what? Promiscuity is every citizen's duty. Because everyone's supposed to love each other, and that's just how it is. And he talked about the breakdown of marriage. It was scary because he wrote this, I think, back in 1930, and saying that it'll get so bad that marriages will be similar to people applying for dog licenses, just to go and to own a dog or a cat or something like that. And it's sort of become like that. It's very, very scary. So, but yeah, whenever I start premarital counseling, and by the way, in the Antiochian Archdiocese, if you want to get married, you have to go through premarital counseling. And for those of you all who are not Orthodox and maybe don't even want to become Orthodox, the best thing that the best advice that I could give you if you want to get married, get premarital counseling. Get it either from a pastor, get it either from a psychologist, get it from a marital counselor or somebody, because premarital counseling really opens up what it's like to be married. And granted, and I say this as a married man, marriage will definitely change your life. And after the honeymoon period is off, you're going to wake up next to this man or woman and wonder, what did I do? Sort of thing. Not in a bad way, but just wondering, like, what happened. But it was useful because I didn't know what it was like to live with somebody. I lived in college, in a dorm just by myself, and so I was a bachelor for essentially 4 years after I got out of school. But living with someone and I'm not talking about cohabitation, I'm talking about marriage. It's a lot different. I've done premarital counseling with people, and one of the things that I do is planning a budget. It's one of the things that I'll do, and that I do with them, because, and I'll talk later on about some of the things that will kill marriage when we get to divorce.
But does the wedding always have to take place in the church?
Yes. Absolutely.
So it's not like modern?
No, it's not like modern day. I've had people ask me, well, can we do it on a boat? Can we do it, I said, no, you can't do it on a boat. You can't do it in a plane. You can't do it in the rain. You have to do it in the church because it's a sacrament of the church. So that's just how it is. But I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that will kill a marriage, and one of the things that kills a marriage is money. Is people not knowing what to do with their money, how to plan a budget, where do we invest our money in? Are we going to invest, if we have kids, are we going to invest in a college fund, or are we going to allow them to take out loans? Are we going to allow them to go into the military and pay that way off? It's stressful, and that's one of the things that will kill marriage, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Man is not meant to be alone. That's one of the aspects that marriage teaches, is that we were meant to have a partner. We were meant to be together. We were communal beings. What did Aristotle say about man, his definition of man? His definition of man was, I think it was a featherless, two-legged being. Biped, yeah. That is social.
Yes, social was the thing.
Right. Or I think it was does politics.
Yes, it's in his politics that
Right.
he gives that.
But ultimately what he was saying is that we're social beings and that we're really not meant to be solitary. I mean, even the Orthodox concept of heaven, of the kingdom, is communal. It's not singular like it is in Islam. You get your own little, in Islam you get your own little garden, you know, and wine and virgins and whatnot. That's nowhere in Christianity. You know, as Dostoevsky said, you know, being in hell is to be alone. Now, you know, but what about monasticism and what about, you know, hermits? Well, hermeticism isn't for everybody. In fact, usually hermeticism is only given to certain monks where their habit for sure knows that they can handle this. And even then, monks will often go at least once a month to go and check on them, to make sure, you know.
Don't they often come back to the church for
communion? Yeah.
Yes, for the liturgy.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Odd. So anyway, but yes, they often come back to the church for communion and for liturgy. So again, there's that communal aspect. Marriage ultimately is a representation of Christ's mystical marriage with his church. Marriage is an icon of that. And with that in mind, there's this idea of the family as being the first church, as being the small church, where you know, with the father being at its head and the wife being his priestess and with his children and raising them in that way.
Priestess has a pagan sound to it. What do you really mean by
Well,
that?
I don't really want to say priestess, but I guess it's just his consort. You know, but also sharing the body.
Yeah,
sharing the same body.
you meant something by priest. I mean, there's a sense in which I
mean, there's a
think
sense
that's
that
a
we're all.
useful idea.
I think that we're all called to be priests. I mean, I didn't mean that in a pagan way, but as a consort to the husband, as a helpmeet, you know, as a helpmate. I suppose.
When I'm teaching, I always have a lot of trouble with students who have this firmly individualistic idea of what humanity is, and they have trouble with the idea that marriages were often arranged by families in past times, and still are in some cultures. But I try to point out to them that this person, in a world where life was truly a struggle, this person was your one reliable ally.
Right.
Day and night, in earning your living. It was never the man went off to the office and earned his living. The living was earned in the home.
Right.
Whether you were a farmer or a blacksmith or whatever you were, both people and all the children participated in the earning of the living. And so it was really a level of involvement with each other that most of us can't really imagine. And that's what's natural to us, is we are allies in everything. And there's not really a sense of being when you're out. It's just not there.
I just recently reread Ken Follett's book, Pillars of the Earth, which takes place in medieval England.
Yeah, I've read that.
They're
That's the cathedral
the
book that you were
cathedral,
talking
yes,
about.
that I mentioned earlier, and there's this one scene at the beginning of the book where the mother dies in childbirth. And there's just this sense of desperation, not just sadness that the mother's died, but this sense of desperation as if, what are we going to do now?
Yeah.
And, now the father is faced with here's someone that was probably supplementing his income, whether it's doing other things or handicrafts or whatnot. But also, not only that, he has no way to feed his infant child. And they end up giving, they expose the child, and a monk ends up finding the child and raises the child as a monk. And I think the child ends up becoming, later on, he ends up becoming the next prior. But yeah, there was that sense of this sense of desperation that.
Well, because
that
you really couldn't.
they don't have life insurance.
You could not handle life on your own.
Right, you couldn't handle life on your own. And that's why monasticism was, you either got married or you became a monk. And even then, in monasteries, this was the same in Byzantium as it was the same in the West. You had to pay a dowry to get into a monastery, or at least give whatever savings you had, to put it into the monastic fund so that everyone could share it. I'll go over the marriage service now in the Orthodox Church, which is very different than Western marriages. Just, I guess, to reiterate or to remind everybody, the marriage service used to take place in liturgy, but at one time in the church that was separated. The marriage service became much more privatized. There is huge debates between theologians as to whether or not it should be reintroduced back into liturgies. I kind of think it should, just because I think that with communion being the queen of all sacraments, communion seals the bond, and I think that's important.
In the way that it is now, can it be done in a liturgical context, or would there have to be kind of?
Technically, yes, but I think now you would have to have a blessing from a bishop, but it's just, yeah. So the first part of the marriage, or the marriage service, is the betrothal. Now, at one time, the betrothal was done separate from the marriage service. In fact, in ancient Byzantium, the betrothal service could have happened when the two people were children, if it was an arranged marriage.
That happened in the West.
Right,
Too.
it happened
Not often,
in the
yeah.
West too, but now the betrothal and the coronation have to be together. They have to flow into each other. So in the betrothal service, there's an exchange of rings. And traditionally, Orthodox Christians wear wedding bands on their right hand. Now a lot of people wear them on their left.
That's a lot.
Usually on the reason why in the West they wear it on their left is because there's this belief that there is a vein that flows from the finger that connects to the heart. In the East, the reason why you wear it on your right hand, your right ring finger, is because this is the hand of power. This is the hand of authority. It's sinister, dexter. That, and in the East, you did certain things with your left hand that you didn't do with your right. So it's kind of the reason why. But anyway, so there's an exchange of rings. And so the groom's finger and take the ring of the groom and put it on the bride's finger, and vice versa, and he'll switch it and to unite the couple. And it's very, very similar to a baptismal service in that both the couple take the epitrachelion, the stole of the priest, and they're led
لست أقول سرك لأعدائي ولا أعطيك قبلة راشة مثل يهود